Okay, time for us to turn our attention back to the Six Nations. I'm delighted to say rugby analyst Ross Hamilton joins us. Ross, good morning to you. How are you getting on?
Yeah, good morning, guys. Very well. How are you?
Yeah, good. The role of the rugby analyst, could you just explain briefly to the uninitiated, when you're working with a team, how important and how much data are you given during the week to the coaching staff, and how do they integrate that into then their patterns of play and training?
Yeah, I would say during the week and sort of out of game time is the most important time for the analysts. There's a whole load of data available, and it's really trying to focus everything down to be relevant for those coaches. Now, some coaches will do a little bit themselves, and they'll have different levels of analysis that they want. But most coaches would want to have a look at opposition analysis more so to build their tactics for the game during the week. Not too many do a lot of them their own players on their own team, actually. They're sort of happy with that themselves, but it definitely filters into their tactics, which will then affect their training blocks, which affects the whole session. So it's obviously very important. It's growing. The whole department of analysis is growing year on year.
That's really interesting. So they're more interested in the opposition, as a rule, obviously, than their own players.
I think they're just sort of comfortable with their own players. They have contact with them all the time and their own team, and they'll know the style that they're playing. So it's at that level, at sort of senior level, international level, and professional level, you're really then adjusting your game plan every week for the new opposition that you're facing. So, and obviously that is week to week in rugby. It's a very quick turnaround. So you've done all your prep for the week, and that's gone. You've got 1 week, a number of days really to prepare everything for that opposition on the weekend. You're with your team for the whole year, so you're fairly comfortable with that. That sort of sits and carries on. It's the opposition that takes the focus, yeah.
You've obviously been doing this for quite a while. What's the difference in game now versus, say, when you started out?
Yeah, huge. The amount that you can now, I guess, code and correlate and put together for the coaches in game is huge. There are more people, there are more analysts, there's more budget for the analysis department, which has been proven to be a very useful aspect of the rugby. So there are more people involved in it. So the information that the guys can get straight away during the game, you'll see it when there's on the camera and they flick up to the coaches, they'll be looking at their laptops and the analyst will be helping them and stuff. And that goes through to half time. I mean, the data that can be turned around as well from sort of the end of the half time to the changing rooms. And the guys will sit there with their laptops and they'll show them clips and they'll show them stats to the players who have sat down. I mean, that kind of content, that kind of information that allows you to then go into the second half and change your performance perhaps is huge.
What's the most important piece of analysis or statistic that is brought to the dressing room at halftime in a match?
I would say it's the things that they need to address or change, really. So there's not one thing every time. Obviously, it's completely different for every game that you're playing in. I guess it's always going to be positive. They'll always try to address an issue that they can change and not sort of slate you. That might come in the week. But positive changes. So small changes, small fixes that the team might be not quite performing as well as they hoped, so that they practice perhaps in the week. Small things like that.
This is a kind of similar question, and maybe it's unanswerable, but are there specific areas of the game which are more or less easy to bring analysis to? I guess in a way, is there a dichotomy between the amount of analysis you can give forwards and backs, given that there are so many set pieces involved for the forwards, so you can actually just go in and go here and here, fix this and away we go, whereas with the backs, if it's broken play, it's more difficult sometimes to get that across in the half-time window in particular.
Yeah, maybe. The sort of level of coding that you can do, so the softwares that are out there that are available, it's still manual, but you can create instances and clips and things like that. And the guys are so well versed in what they're trying to capture during the game to help them in half time, they will still be available. So if it's a launch play for the backs, if it is broken field attack, they'll still have all of that data, and they are able to sort of code that and therefore get some information out of it. So backs or forwards or any kind of situation on the pitch, there will be data available and they will be able to look at that, especially if that's specific to their team. Every team will have different aspects that they're trying to look at, so the analyst will match that and they'll look at that during the game specifically.
Okay, to kind of maybe highlight exactly the conversation we've been having, you've had a look at 3 separate bits of information coming from the Six Nations so far: Ireland's ruck speed, a bit about England's power game, and France's efficiency. Where do you want to start?
Start with France, shall we? They're the best team, unbeaten.
Yeah, okay.
Well, yes. So France, for me, have developed so much so quickly. For me, again, they're the best team in the world right now. France have always had that pace and power aspect, but the thing that they've adapted for me or developed is the efficiency at the end of that. So pace and power gives you chances and looks great on TV, but does that win you matches? Does that win you championships? In France's case, no. But what they've really done is added that layer to it, which has got them their results. And for me, again, you'd say odds on for a Grand Slam. So I've got a few sort of different metrics that I pulled together to show that. They start really quickly. Everything to do with them is about speed, finishing tries, scoring, taking opportunities, even at the start of the game. All about speed and taking the chances that they get. So they have the best points difference in the first half in the Six Nations so far. So get themselves out to a lead. Other teams have to chase. It was the case for Ireland, possibly. They sort of felt they had to chase. It puts them off their game a little bit. France are then comfortable in that position, and they can then dictate how the game plays. The next thing then is try sources. So we look at tries scored from broken field, as you mentioned there. And France have scored 8 tries from broken field, and that's the most in the competition so far. And that's 62% of all of their tries. Now, that is technically the second most. Italy have scored 1 try in the competition. It was from a kick receipt, which is classed as broken field, but we can probably discount that. So even as a percentage of all of their tries, France are focusing on broken play more. So when there is a turnover, when there is a kick receipt, and you've got that disjointed, disorganised defence, they are taking advantage of that straight away and scoring most of their tries from that point. The second thing to add on to that, so once you've got that possession from the broken field, we then have a metric to see how many tries are scored within each phase of play. And again, France have scored the most tries within 3 phases in the whole competition. It's 11. 11 of their 13 tries have come within 3 phases. I mean, that's 85%. Again, technically, Italy scored their try in the 3rd phase, so it's 100%, but we're discounting it again. But to score 11 of your 13 tries in competition within 3 phases just shows how quickly and how efficient you want to be. They're trying to be, taking advantage of the disorganised defence and the broken field and getting the job done straight away. Doesn't take them 6, 7, 10, 20 phases to do it. They take advantage of the disorganised defence and score straight away. And then the last element of that for France is their efficiency. So we look at efficiency in terms of the red zone, which would be the opposition 22. They get the most entries into the opposition 22 in any games, 13 on average per game. And then their efficiency is recorded by points per entry number. And they score 2.33 points per entry. Now, again, that's a pretty high return if you average that across the games. So they really create a lot of their chances straight away, and then they convert them. Again, that was what I said at the start. But they've always been exciting team to watch, but they never had that final element of converting that scores, converting their tries, and then sort of getting the results at the back of it.
Okay, let's talk about England, because we're not quite sure where this England team are at the moment. There's certainly a debate raging on this show about, well, England are doing what you should do if you're trying to build a team for the World Cup. They're a bit behind France because France have had this home World Cup to aim for a long period of time, and they clearly took the decision a couple of years ago that was all that mattered to them, and we're starting to see the fruition of the kids they've invested in. England obviously were in a bit of turmoil after the last World Cup, but had done really well, so that transition is beginning to happen now. What are you seeing in terms of their power game in particular?
Their power game is the only thing for me that's really functioning. It's got them out of a couple of results. It probably was the reason why they beat Wales in that first half, really, nothing else after that. I had a look at their sort of attacking stats, and I'm never really sure about this transition period with teams and things. I mean, England have so much depth and talent and player pool available. I'm never sure that there should be sort of a transition period that's so notable. I think it's got to be a development, sure, and you're going to peak at the World Cup, but to sort of, I'm English. We haven't played well at all, I don't think, in any of the 3 games. We've got away with a couple of results. But again, I had a look at some of the sort of the key stats. There's a few, but I'll try and just go through them quickly. Where England are not performing very well, their attack isn't firing. Even with a Marcus Smith, you can see that he's there and he's got the skill set, but is the rest of the team around him suited for it? Not so sure. So there's a load of metrics that we have for their attack. We look at clean breaks. They average 5 per game, which is 3rd in the competition. Defenders beaten 15 is 4th. Offloads, they don't have too many. That's also 4th. Even kicks in play is 4th. there's a whole load of these stats to sort of put them, mid to bottom table across the Six Nations when they should be at least top three, you'd say, with Ireland and France, the two others. But then some more ones, some really sort of interesting ones. One thing we look at, which we'll touch on with Ireland, is their ruck speed. Eddie Jones addressed this just before the autumn, and he said he wanted to try and get their ruck speed average to 2.7 seconds per ruck, which is incredibly quick, and it's something that Ireland are managing. But England's ruck speed at the moment is 3.8 seconds in the game, and that puts them in fourth. And I mean, 1 second extra on a ruck is a huge difference in terms of trying to create space and opportunities. There's a similar thing with how many rucks they have under 3 seconds. They're in fourth. Their line-out success and scrum success is fifth in the league, and then their red zone efficiency that I mentioned for France is also fifth with just 1.79 points per entry. So not many attacking stats are really going towards or for England, and they're not really performing. The only thing, as we mentioned, is their power game. There's two key metrics here that we look at: gain line success and collision success, and they're first on both of those.
Right.
So 62% gain line success, 30% collision success.
Okay.
And those numbers as well in terms of success are, for a gain line, it's getting over the gain line, not just on it. And a collision success is a dominant collision, not just a neutral. So 62 and 30 respectively are high, but that is really it. That's all they've got. That's all they're doing, and it's scraped them through a couple of games so far.
Yeah, I suppose our fear as not England supporters is that they're going to use that as a platform, and that the team around Marcus Smith, if they get the selection correct, or if Tuilagi comes back, which obviously he will at some point, and if Owen Farrell comes back, then all of a sudden you've got brain power, extra power, and some finesse in that back line that might unleash some of the talent they have. But I don't know. My thing about the transition is that you just need to find the right combinations. It's great having the depth, but you don't know that these players are going to work very well together, or will be able to get on the same wavelength without actually having had 8-10 caps together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fair. I think that's fair. And I think obviously with Manu, any team in the world is going to miss Manu, and he's a different beast, and our backline would look completely different with Manu. You fear that then we rely on Manu, and that's the only thing we offer, and obviously you want to balance it out. What I do think with that is, without Manu, and especially this weekend of having him for a couple of hours before he was then out, the rest of the team has to pick up that role that we just associate that he's going to do. So, even our props, Genge and Sinclair, ball carriers, they're such powerful athletes. Our back row, Tom Curry isn't necessarily considered an attacking rugby player, but he is carries a bit like Josh van der Fleer. The athletes that these guys are now, they still have power going forward, and they may take up the rest of the slack. Obviously, we need to balance that, and we may not have had that so much in our backline, and that would be where Manu comes in.
Yeah, okay, that's really interesting. Ireland's ruck speed, then, you've kind of you've trailed this one. We're doing pretty well.
Yes, very well, very, very well. Really impressive. I mean, how ferocious Ireland seem to be at the breakdown, how much of an aspect it must be their focus. And I'll go through this. So we have a look at how many rucks a team has. Ireland average 111 rucks in a game for the 3 games so far. There's some other teams in the competition that are down at 40, 50, 60. So they're having a lot of possession and a lot of rucks, and yet they still have the best average ruck speed. And that's 2.89 seconds per ruck. And for that to be across 111 rucks is honestly incredible. It's not something we see very often. It's a lot easier to get very quick rucks if you have very few of them, and it might become your focus to, say, kick the ball away, only have a few rucks. When you then strike, you strike really quickly, and you can manage that ruck speed. But to do that across so many rucks is incredible. And then what it gives them off of the back of it, is everything. It is the biggest metric, I think, in rugby at the moment. It's something that's only sort of really coming across the board, across the world, that we have available for the last year or so, couple of years most. And it's such a big metric to measure where a team's attack is and how many chances they create.
So we actually turned the ball over in the ruck quite a bit against Italy. They won 5 or 6 penalties against us because it looked like we weren't committing enough men to the rucks, partly to do with the fact they only had 13 men and we knew we were going to win. And so all of that factors into it. Is there some way of kind of balancing this out where if that was to happen in a big game against a good team, you would be able to say the ruck speed was really good, but you need to dock Ireland points for this metric, or you need to caveat that metric by saying that they also conceded 4 penalties in the ruck.
Yeah, they did against Italy. They still have the best ruck success in the competition so far, across all the sort of 3 games. So there's obviously a balance in there. I would suggest that if that is a focus, which it feels like it is, that they're probably only committing 1 or 2 guys to that ruck, expecting them to do their job. And if they get that right, and if they clear the ball out, the ball's away quickly, and they've got players on feet to then attack in the next phase. If they don't, which is the risk, and they get turned over, then obviously they lose the ball. But that's possibly a worthwhile risk,
right?
A sort of risk to reward payoff that you might sacrifice a couple of rucks, but for the rest of, say it was 5 turnovers at the ruck, they might have lost a couple more, but you've then got over 100 rucks that are lightning quick ball, and you can play and then attack the next phase. As a payoff, it's possibly worth it.
That's really interesting, because I think the crowd and the TV analysts are going to be like, oh, we're not committing enough to the rucks. And it's like, well, actually, our ruck success rate is 97%, and we're taking those 5 penalties on the basis that we feel our defence from the set piece is going to be strong enough. That's as you say, a trade-off we're willing to make. That's where the power of the analysis comes in.
Absolutely, and that links in, and it definitely feels like, to be at that level, I'm sort of talking a lot about it. To be at that level on that many rucks, it has to be a focus. It's not something that just happens. It's not something that teams can just sort of turn up and do. There's a focus from every single player, the ball carrier, the clear out, the 9, everything. It has to be a focus. So I'm sure they know all these stats as well. They will have gone through it and say, this is a payoff. We're willing to take that risk because of what it gives us off the back of it. And again, I've just sort of mentioned some other stats I looked at for Ireland. Was your ruck speed creates chances. It disorganises the defence, gets them on the back foot, creates holes, which then might create line breaks, which then gets you into the right areas to score the tries. That's one thing. Converting those is another. So Scotland struggle with this. They have really quick ruck speed, second in the competition so far, but their red zone efficiency and converting is really poor. So yes, it's good in one sense, but what does it really matter in the second? And that's again where Ireland come into their own, is they have this ruck speed and then they're converting it. I've always said is, yes, you have to caveat that with it was Italy, and Italy 13 men, so those stats would have affected it. But I mean, France and England have played Italy, not against 13, but Ireland still being at the top of this still has some weighting, and their red zone efficiency is the best. So they get into the red zone second behind France, but then they score the most points when they're there and the most points per entry.
Right.
So they have both aspects of it, the speed of ball and the conversion as well.
It's really interesting. One last question for you. People can follow you on Twitter, and with the Twitter handle is @RoscoeHamilton. Are you finding people are more conversant in the details and the minutiae of the game, and just generally more interested in it as the quality of coverage progresses as much as it has done in the last decade?
100%. It's been my battle for a long time, working in sort of broadcast and media alongside the sort of team stuff I used to do. There's sort of the old adage that they're casual viewers and it's going to go over their head and people aren't interested and they just want sort of the entertainment, the feel of it. But that has changed. I mean, football, obviously, most places is the leading sport, and that's changed. There's detail and analysis, and people love that kind of thing. And it's easily available. It's quick. There's social media. There's podcasts. There's everything. It's all available to the guys. And I think we're about catching up with it. TV is catching up with it. Some of the coverage from the Six Nations, I feel, is really adapting that. There's some shows that sort of go around it, that support it, that really add this in. And for me, what it does is educate some viewers, and maybe something of this is educating to somebody, and they'll get that ruck speed thing in their mind, and they'll watch a game, and they'll think, well, gee, these rucks are really quick. That means that the chances are going to happen, but we need to take those chances at the end of it, and then they'll think about red zone efficiency. So it sort of engages them in the game a little bit better.
100%. Yeah, no, you're dead right. And that was a brilliant explainer of those three pieces for us this morning, Ross. Thanks a million. Great to have you with us.
Pleasure. Thanks very much.
Enjoy the rest of the tournament. That's Ross Hamilton there. And as I said, you can follow him at Roscoe Hamilton on Twitter, and you can check out the website elitetalentid.com.